So, William Walker Atkinson's Vril, or Vital Magnetism, the previous chapter, chapter 7, was Vril in the air. Now this is 8, chapter 8, Vril and the breath. Occultists in ancient and modern times have bestowed great attention upon the matter of the influence of the breath upon psychic power and physical well-being. Under various theories, they have laid down complex rules and announced fantastic methods of breathing for the purpose of increasing one's vitality and one's physical energy and psychic power. As is nearly always the case, we find here an example of a bit of truth surrounded by a mass of rubbish. The center of fact surrounded by the fringe of superstition. All right, so let's consider the matter in the spirit of fairness and of understanding, but with the sole purpose of discovering the core of truth and exposing the error with which it's surrounded. All right? Okay, in the first place, physiology teaches that correct and normal habits of, where am I here? Of breathing are necessary to perfect health and tend to restore health to those who have lost it. It is an elementary truth of physiology that the quality of the blood depends largely upon correct habits of breathing. Unless the blood be properly oxygenated, right, the waste matter of the system is not properly consumed. The result being that the system is dogged, and poisoned by broken down tissue and other debris. Moreover, in such a case, the cells of the body suffer from the lack of a sufficient amount of oxygen, which under normal conditions they receive from the blood. So again, the processes of digestion depended to a certain extent upon the presence of oxygen in the blood, right? And the absence of oxygen reacts materially upon the digestion and assimilation of food, and consequently upon the welfare of the entire system. And not only that, but the nervous system too, even the brain, depend upon the condition of the blood for the nourishment and the stimulus which is necessary in their processes. So in short, unless the blood be sufficiently oxygenated, the entire system suffers and is unable to function normally or naturally. And as the oxygenation of the blood is accomplished only through correct habits of breathing, it is seen that the whole system is dependent upon proper breathing. The natural man breathes properly by reason of his habits of life, but the man of our complex and artificial civilization has lost that natural method. And few men or women breathe as nature intended that they should. Well, so much for the physiological aspect of the question. In addition to the physiological side of the case, then, as we just talked about, there's also the side which ordinary physiology ignores, but which is of equal importance to the more familiar side, the phase of breath which is concerned with the absorption of Vril. We have seen that the natural man absorbs sufficient Vril in his ordinary breathing, without knowing anything about the matter. His instinctive mentality regulates the matter and coordinates the work of breathing for oxygen and breathing for Vril to such a nicety of degree that a perfect harmony exists, and the observer may fail to even notice the existence of the dual function because of that perfect unity. Yeah, but the civilized man of the nervous strain and unnatural rush of life in the large cities not only does not receive the normal amount of oxygen, but also fails to absorb the normal amount of Vril. This is especially deplorable by reason of the fact that while absorbing much less than the normal amount of Vril, he uses and wastes much more than the normal amount. With such a man, or woman, it is indeed a burning of the candle at both ends, and the result is seen in the nervous wrecks and shattered constitutions that are evident on all sides. Well, it'll be seen by the student that before we can consider the special methods of absorbing Vril by breathing, we have to first take up the matter of establishing natural, normal breathing methods, which will not only result in one absorbing the normal amount of Vril, but at the same time will give him the proper amount of oxygen, as indicated by the authorities of physiology. So, in indicating the normal, natural process of breathing, we not only aid the student in increasing his Vril supply, but at the same time establish him in habits which must result in an improvement of his general health and state of physical well-being. And this is as it should be, for the various phases of the physical being are more or less interdependent, and harmony between them is always desirable. So, to many, the idea of instructing the race in correct habits of breathing, it might seem ridiculous. And so would it be if the race lived normally and naturally. But, the animal needs no instruction in breathing. Neither does the barbarian unspoiled by contact with civilization. The infant born under desirable conditions, or the young child properly reared, at least before it makes acquaintance with the school desk. But when it's remembered that physiology informs us that the great majority of civilized persons breathe incorrectly and contrary to nature's evident plan, well, then we think it might be admitted that instruction along these lines is not unreasonable or unnecessary, let alone ridiculous. Physiology informs us that there are three general forms of breathing practiced by the race of men. And these forms are known by the following names. Number 1, clavicular breathing. Number 2, intercostal breathing. And 3, abdominal breathing. The distinctive features of each are described right now, following. Okay, the first one, clavicular breathing. I had it right the first time. Clavicular breathing. Clavicular breathing is also called collarbone breathing because it's common to many persons, and particularly women, interestingly, and it's considered by the best authorities to be the very worst form of breathing known to the race. Clavicular breathing necessitates the expenditure of the greatest amount of effort with the least return, a maximum of energy with a minimum of result. Bad investment. It is held accountable for many diseases of lungs and throat. Persons practicing clavicular breathing habitually often have harsh, discordant voices. It's found frequently in connection with mouth breathing. In this form of breathing, the person raises the collarbone and shoulders and pulls up the ribs, at the same time drawing in the abdomen. This movement allows only the upper part of the chest to be inflated, and only the upper part of the lungs to be filled. That's it. But a small quantity of air is admitted to the lungs, as only the upper and smaller portion of the lungs is employed. One may easily convince himself of the folly and the inefficacy of this form of breathing just by trying the experiment of raising his shoulders and endeavoring to take in a full breath. Just try it. Well, then let him drop the shoulders and take a full natural breath and take note of the difference. This experiment is the best possible argument against this injurious method of breathing, which is too often habitual with men and women who work over desks, sewing machines, typewriters, and so on. Okay, so we come to the second kind of breathing now, intercostal breathing. We go from clavicular to intercostal. Intercostal breathing is also sometimes called rib breathing. It's a compromise, at the best. It's an improvement over clavicular breathing, but it's still inferior to abdominal breathing, the third form of breathing. It's far below the standard of the full breath. Okay, well, in intercostal breathing, the upper ribs are inflated, the abdomen drawn in, and the diaphragm pushed upward. It employs the middle part of the chest and lungs, neglecting the lower and the upper. It's a favorite method of breathing with many men. Excuse me, I seem to have this slight runny right nostril right now. Maybe I need to go do the water up the nostril and out the mouth thing. It's a favorite method of breathing with many men. Women seldom practice intercostal breathing, but pass on to the clavicular breathing method that we were just talking about. It is only a halfway method at best, intercostal breathing. Well, okay, now abdominal breathing. This form of breathing is often referred to as deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. It's been highly recommended by a number of eminent authorities of late years, and many of the health magazines have made a leading feature out of it. Systems and methods of teaching it have been widely advertised, and large prices have often been obtained for just a little simple instruction decorated with frills and dressed up with fancy names and titles, terms. The principle of abdominal breathing is, however, really quite simple, as you can imagine, or probably already know. Its benefits will repay the student who acquaints himself with it and practices it until he has fully mastered it. But we feel that it is but a part of a larger method known as the full breath, which we'll describe a little further on. But for now, to understand abdominal breathing, we must first acquaint ourselves with that wonderful piece of physical mechanism known as the diaphragm, which is defined as an inspiratory muscle, and the sole agent in tranquil respiration. Sole agent in tranquil respiration. It is the muscular septum between the thorax and the abdomen. It assists the abdominal muscles powerfully in expulsion, each act of that kind being accompanied or preceded by a deep inspiration. It also comes into play in hiccuping and sobbing, crying, laughing, crying. In simple terms, the diaphragm is a strong, plate-shaped muscle which divides the chest and its contents from the abdomen and its contents. At rest, it is arched upward in the center, like the inside of an inverted bowl. The sky, or as an arched dome, it's arched upward in the center like the inside of an inverted bowl, or the sky, or it's like an arched dome appears to us if we're below it. So viewed from the chest, the upper side or the surface of the diaphragm would seem like the rounded top of a man's derby hat, or the rounded top of a hill. In normal breathing, the diaphragm is flattened out by the arched dome pressing downward. Well, this movement causes the diaphragm to bear downward on the contents of the abdomen. and the abdomen is pressed outward in front because of that, and outward at the sides too. And this movement occurs in abdominal breathing. In abdominal breathing, the lower part of the lungs is filled. The diaphragm is pressed down and the abdomen is pressed out in the front and to the sides as described. And it's difficult to direct or correctly describe the exact motions of abdominal breathing, okay? But this, you'll acquire the same, you'll acquire the exact motions by practicing them using the description just given as a basis. By bearing down on the abdomen, by lowering the diaphragm and pressing out the abdominal muscles, the lower lungs are given space and free movement, and the deep breath is instinctively then just automatically inhaled. And that's how it works. A little practice will enable anyone to demonstrate this for him or herself, much better than by reading pages and pages of printed information about it. It's pretty much just a simple thing. Action of the diaphragm moving down, okay, pushing down, flattening out in that downward direction. Okay, but let's get on to full breathing. The best authorities agree that the best possible form of breathing is that which is based on abdominal breathing. It's based on abdominal breathing, but which also includes the filling of the middle and upper part of the lungs too. It is based on the abdominal breath. By what may seem to be a striking coincidence here, it's noted that this particular form of breathing, full breathing, is that which was taught by the ancient arcane teachers to their students as a means of increasing the absorption of, you guessed it, Vril. But the coincidence is quite a natural one, and it would be indeed strange had it not occurred. For this full breathing method is the true, natural, normal method of breathing, which natural man instinctively employs. Simple. It not only fills every part of the lungs and exercises every part of the chest, not only secures the greatest possible amount of oxygen and Vril, but it also obtains the greatest returns from the least comparative effort. It's an example of the universal economy of nature, just as marked as is the economy of the form of the wax cell of the bee's honeycomb. In full breathing, all of the respiratory muscles are called into play. The entire area of the lungs is used. The entire machinery of the respiratory organism is exercised, strengthened, and developed. There is every evidence that this, and this alone, is nature's normal method of breathing. Moreover, it is known that the hardiest races of men have practiced this form of breathing. We know this from the modern instances, and because the statuary of ancient Greece shows that muscular development of the abdomen and chest, which comes only from this form of breathing. It is the first word of nature to man regarding breathing. It is the last word to science, of science to man on the same subject. It is the best natural method. It is the best scientific method. Full breathing is not an artificial system or a method of breathing, but rather is a return to natural, normal methods and habits. But nevertheless, it will require some practice on the part of many students thereof, or hereof, by reason of the fact that they have lost their natural instinct in the matter, and are under the dominion of the second nature, so to speak, of false habit. Before the instinctive habit may be resumed, the effect of the false habit must be overcome, and this usually takes some time. The best, and indeed almost the only way of counteracting and defeating any objectionable habit is to practice its opposite. And this rule applies here with great force. The only way to get rid of the old habit is to practice the new one. And the only way to acquire the new one is to, well, you have to practice it. That's it. So from both angles, the importance of practice is seen. So here's an exercise. The following exercise will serve to develop the full breath, if conscientiously practiced. Got to practice it. Number 1, stand erect or be seated in a natural position. Inhale slowly through the nostrils, not mouth, and according to the method of abdominal breathing. Fill in the lower lungs. Press down the diaphragm and push out the abdomen in front and at the sides. Then in a continuous effort, number 2, fill the middle part of the chest and lungs, as in intercostal breathing now, pressing outward the midribs, breastbone, and chest. And then in the same continuous effort, number 3, fill the upper portion of the lungs, as in clavicular breathing, lifting the upper portion of the chest, slightly raising the collarbone, slightly drawing in the abdomen now, and thus raising the diaphragm, as heretofore explained. It'll be noticed that this method of full breathing is really a combination of the 3 forms of breathing that we already mentioned: clavicular, intercostal, and abdominal, or diaphragmatic. Beginning, of course, with the abdominal, proceeding to the intercostal, and finishing with the clavicular. But the student is cautioned against proceeding as if it were 3 distinct and separated stages of the process. It's one continuous process, rising gradually from the lower part of the lungs to the middle portion and then to the upper portion. A uniform, continuous muscular movement is effected this way, the several regions being called into action in a rising sequence. All disconnected, spasmodic, jerky motion should be avoided. A little practice, and you'll have the result in the acquirement of the continuous inhalation. The inhaled air should be retained for a moment and then exhaled naturally and easily. No attempt should be made to unduly retain the breath, but that is taught by some schools of breathing. But no attempt should be made to unduly retain the breath. There is nothing to be gained by the retention in the lungs of stale, exhausted air, okay? Nothing to be gained from it. Besides which, there's always more or less of strain in this forced retention, as the whole process is unnatural. In normal, natural breathing, there is no sense of strain or effort when once the habit is acquired. Or rather, guess we should say reacquired. The infant or young child manifests no effort or strain in breathing, and neither should the adult. But it may take some practice. Some teachers announce a variety of methods of breathing, which upon examination are found for the most part to consist of fantastic and fanciful processes, designed evidently to impress the student with the novelty and presumably great virtue of these invented methods. There was only one safe and sane rule. Safe and sane rule. 1. And that is to go back to nature. Plain and simple. The full breath is nature's own method. If you doubt this, Watch the motions of a sleeping, healthy child or a sturdy infant. Just watch. So the next chapter or lesson will be number 9. The secret of Vril absorption.